Hello, dear YouTube Sangha, and welcome to another episode, Buddhist Perspectives. Today we are discussing the crisis that is going on in California. All of our intentions go towards people there. We are in solidarity with you. Luckily, one of us here, Dharma Sense, is an expert, or, I would say, I'm not sure fully an expert, but you're very well versed in climate issues and things of this nature. So I was wondering, could you give like a brief rundown of what is actually happening in California and why we should be concerned?
Well, if you followed on the news at all, you've seen just the utter devastation and just an entire community wiped off the map by wildfire. And I guess the question would be, is it caused directly by climate change? That's always a difficult question to answer. It's hard to tie any one disaster event to climate change in particular, but what climate change does is exacerbates the problem. It creates the conditions for climate change events or natural disaster events to occur. In this case, California or Southern California, the Los Angeles County, they had 2 years of record rainfall, which essentially grew the vegetation in the area, and then that was quickly followed by record drought, which dried it out and made it kindling for fire. And then they had Santa Ana winds occur, which are winds that come from the California desert over the mountains down into the valley, bringing hot, dry air and carrying embers and throwing embers everywhere. So it was just perfect conditions for the fires to ignite. And I think as of now, when we're making this recording, I think the death toll is about 24 people, if I'm not mistaken, and about between five separate main fires. I believe somewhere a total of 36,000 acres have been burned. Just sheer devastation.
Wow.
And sadly, if you know anything about what causes climate change, which is global warming, which is created by the greenhouse effect, um, we're just seeing the beginning of it because emissions continue to rise. I believe our last 10 years of the hottest years on record have just been in the last decade. And this past year, our target of 1.5 C over pre-industrial averages, we exceeded that for the median average for the year for the
Wow.
first time. So while we're making a lot of progress in areas like bringing the cost of wind and solar down below its competitors, fossil fuels, which is good, and market forces should begin to take over. We're continuing to increase our emissions, and it looks like events like this, sadly, are just the beginning.
Right. And I want to say, well, something you mentioned was about Santa Ana winds. Is that what they're called? Santa Ana?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, like I'm not really at such a level of understanding climate change, but I did take a master's course in it. Well, at least in global, climate and the policies but from what I understand, part of the nature of winds is that they are highly like indicative of changing temperatures. I mean, wouldn't that
Mm.
be the case? I mean, the winds that we receive, I mean, in part come from like the Coriolis effect of the Earth, where the Earth is spinning, and therefore, all the atmosphere itself is in flux. But then the just the sheer temperatures that change through climate change actually intensify winds and intensify weather patterns, as far as I understand. Would you agree that
Right.
that's a good synopsis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Temperature and pressure.
Okay, temperature and pressure.
Pre-
Right. And
Pressure is really the main driving force, and
yeah.
temperature will be sort of a symptom of that.
So like I have here that rising temperatures and drought have been plaguing California. Rising global temperatures have led to increased frequency and severity of heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. and this is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Um,
Hmm.
very authoritative sources have given just more and more evidence and have sort of corroborated that a lot of California's issues are they stem from climate change itself. And
Right.
it's not always causation, but there's a correlation. Like I have another little factoid that California's average temperature has risen by 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900, with most of that increase occurring since 1970. And that's from
Mm.
the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the
Right.
NOAA. And they,
No.
yeah, or NOAA, yeah, sorry. I like to, I use the acronyms like the initials, but NOAA as I guess how they're referred to often. But um, this is not a new observation. It's not one. And actually, in our last episode, we talked about wealth inequality and wealth disparity and the cult of privatization and things. And I find
Mhm.
that there's an interesting, um, you know, overlap or, I used the term correlation earlier, but the term, the reason I'm saying that is because it was the cult of privatization that Tony Judd called it, where for a little while in the 1970s, we saw a stark change in deregulation and how corporations were now taking the reins on their business, and how they conducted things, mass production, and unmitigated externalities, right? So there was
Mm.
this little period of time where we started to see externalities crop up. And I'm from Rochester, so I know that like Kodak, the industrial side, was doing some unscrupulous things with their waste, and it became a controversy all around the United States. And uh, again, that's direct effects of pollution and environmental devastation. But then again, from my childhood, I think back to the news cycles, and I remember the newscasting about smog and how LA had a particular problem with smog caused by traffic and acid rain and all this stuff. And it was all
Hmm.
sensationalized by, things like on MTV, like, I would watch shows that would highlight that and make jokes out of it, but in actuality, that was like the sick, sad world that we were seeing on the news, right?
Well,
Folks.
interestingly enough, what you bring up,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, had a little bit to do with the ozone layer and
Yes, ozone.
using CFCs, which are particles from aerosols.
Yep.
And the government stepped up and put a ban on those.
Well,
And
no, it
we
was.
essentially solved that problem. So we are capable of doing
I,
good
I
things.
I'm happy to say that that was the Kyoto Protocol that brought it in, and I lived in Kyoto for 6 years, so um,
George Bush took us
yeah,
out of the Kyoto Protocol.
right, okay. So
Yeah.
there you have it, folks. Like you see, like they sort of um, the conflict of interest here, where you have certain mainstream politicians essentially seeing these policies as anathema to their bottom line, which is seeking profits and lining the pockets of
Yeah,
people who,
there's a big line of villainy in this story.
yeah,
It really does,
right,
because if you trace back the history of the science of
yeah,
just greenhouse gas science, it dates back to the 1850s. I think he was Scottish, John Tyndall,
hmm
um, and there was an American woman, Eunice Foote, who was studying the effects of carbon in the atmosphere all the way back then. And both of them independently discovered that the greenhouse gases, methane and carbon dioxide, trap heat in the atmosphere and used in large quantities would raise the surface temperature of the planet. So it's been since the 1850s that we've actually known the science.
yeah,
In the 1970s, Exxon and some other big oil companies employed scientists because they were worried about like how their equipment would fare in the weather, wanted to essentially study what the effects of their product does. And so they discovered that, again, that their product was causing the earth to warm. So they were at first, what do we do about it? They were kind of open with it. They shared their reporting. There was even talk about maybe transitioning to renewable energy at the time was just fledgling, but the science was already underway. But during the 80s, they decided no, they were just going to double down on denial. They created what's called the Global Climate Coalition,
Yeah.
GCC,
Yeah.
and launched by using the same people that tobacco used to say that their products were safe, to say that oil would be safe. And so they started the campaign to attack climate scientists, to deny the scientists, basically to ensure their profits.
Mm.
So there's been a war against the science, a war against truth going on now for half a century. And it's
Well,
sad because this is where we knew we were going to be. If anybody would have paid attention to the science and acted accordingly in time,
right.
this could be avoided. But here we are because of actual denial campaigns, which further politicized a nonpartisan issue. And they turned it into making something about burning fossil fuels is like equivalent to freedom somehow. And like if
Right. Yeah.
you're into solar or electric cars, you're somehow woke. And it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, they turned it into a culture war, and which was basically it's propaganda 101. You want to vilify the other side, as it were, or whatever it is, because they're the people that want to prolong the delusion that there's no human caused crises and climate change. Their motive is very simple. It's just keeping the status quo, keeping business as usual, so that they can continue to make record profits while people suffer. And the thing about climate issues and climate crises is that it affects the most vulnerable people at the most often. Like, so, like here in Florida, we had devastating hurricanes.
Mm.
Milton was an anomaly. Milton just came out of nowhere. Nobody saw it, getting to the strength that it did. The only thing that could explain it was something akin to, well, it's climate change, guys. Like, like because
Right.
the direction Milton travels, the mass of the storm itself,
Hmm.
was just only explained through changes in the atmospheric pressure, the temperature, the direction it traveled was also an anomaly. And
Hmm.
then what's worse is that the infrastructure of the least advantaged, least privileged people in Florida is was already just in shambles, so that
For sure.
people had
Yeah.
already been hit by other storms and
Right.
were,
We had Helene right before Milton.
yeah, Helene, but also Ian before that. Ian left
Right.
people
Yeah.
in shambles, and there was like, my neighborhood. I won't say which neighborhood, but my neighborhood was, had a problem with their irrigation, and that
Yeah.
was since Ian. And they never
Right.
they because of like budget issues and just the fact that this place is not a well-to-do neighborhood. Let's
Right.
just
We
say,
were underwater in Ian too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Absolutely.
right. So it has its effects. Like, I know that in California, the fires there affected rich and poor, alike. However, who has the insurance? Who has another estate, other houses, other, resources that they could rely on, that they can build upon? But like average everyday people don't have that, and especially the least
Not even the
advantaged.
average everyday people, even the wealthy people out there. The insurance is a huge problem. Not only
Yeah.
did rates soar, I read somewhere that somebody was paying about $4,600 a year,
Mm.
and their insurance soared to $18,000 in the
Yeah.
next statement, which is unaffordable at that point. And so you just drop it. And so you have situations like that, or you have companies that just pull up we're not going to insure here anymore. It's too risky.
Right,
And then
right.
so, like all the casualty insurance companies, they just pack up and leave town. And then so you can't get insurance. And it's a real tragedy for everybody involved. My
Yeah,
heart
and
breaks for all the people that are impacted. I can't imagine the loss. The One of the stories was particularly wrenching about how a mother had to leave one of her disabled sons who couldn't get out of the house um, and escape. And just that kind of tragedy just breaks your heart, and
yeah,
it makes me
I
more
imagine.
angry that it's this is something that could have been avoided but for disinformation, but for basic greed. That these companies have perpetrated an evil against humankind that our kids are going to pay dearly for.
Yeah, and I think that it serves well to be watchful of these things. I think that a lot of what happens is simply because there's a lack of vigilance. There's like, you know, as a veteran, I can say that being vigilant in certain ways is very effective. And I'm not saying it to be like adversarial or antagonistic or to single people out, but people are suffering. It's like, and the people that suffer are the most vulnerable. Like those are
Yep.
the people that suffer the most, are the people that are the most vulnerable. And so, I just have this protective quality about myself. I don't know. It's just um, that, like, why did I join the military in the first place? Was to, I mean, part of it was self glorification, but the other part was actually like I felt I needed to protect people from being hurt by terrorists, as it were. But it
Yeah.
turns out that where I was focusing my attention was in the wrong direction. It should have been focused on the enemy within, which means the people that put me in that very position, the people that like lined their pockets while I went over there and my friends went over there, and we're fighting a senseless war. Um, Meanwhile, the war itself actually contributes to climate change as well.
Mhm.
And then there's but not only that, but like there's also just the sheer devastation, the human suffering. There's a human component to all of this, and there's also the component of the creatures of the natural world that are also, in disarray. Their habitats are being lost. We focus on the human crisis, but what about our friends out there in the brush, in the woods, in the desert?
Absolutely, for sure.
Like, they are also suffering. And I'm not saying that to be sappy or to be like, Disney princess. The reason I'm saying that is because we rely on those ecosystems as much as they do. And like we
Right.
rely on biodiversity, we rely on, like humans can understand. And I see that a lot of times these days in pop culture, popular culture, people look at animals and they feel pity for them and they want to, coddle them and stuff. And I'm always like, well, okay, you can see that. Well, why can't you make that connection at the human level? And it's a very odd thing that I feel. It's almost like an instinct that I feel like we learned from our like medieval and prehistoric history, where prehistoric history, but like our, you know, essentially like our feudalistic and hunter gathering past. There's memories of being assaulted by other people, and the only people, like, other creatures that you can trust are animals naturally because they rely on
Yeah.
you. But
I've always loved the Native American notion that the animals essentially are our brethren.
yeah,
We
right,
learn from the animals, and we treat them with the same sort of respect that we would treat our own kin.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's a real good way to look at life in general and have respect for the
Just,
natural
yeah,
world.
respect and reverence. Like, even they were sometimes hunter cultures, but they
Hmm.
like they understood that those creatures, they contributed to their sustenance and their well-being.
It's all part of the web.
Yeah, it's all part of the circle of life, as it were. I mean,
Hmm.
and some of it is sort of, in my opinion, a little bit of it is romanticized, and but as a Buddhist, we do, as Buddhists, we do recognize the health of the natural world is also our health as well. Like, um,
All living beings.
yes, all living beings interconnected. So we're all
Hmm.
interconnected. These so-called externalities that, you know, essentially corporate America and the corporate world in general is visiting all this harm on us. If we could point to any source of the massive and rapid devastation, it's the corporate side of things, and not again, it's not to scapegoat or to say like, if you work for a corporation that you're a terrible person. I don't think that's the case. I think that a lot of folks get into that way of life, and it just becomes a way of life. It's just like you can't help but live within that system, play that game, as it were. And a lot of times, if we talk about the human element, something about it is human, and that's how they learn how to survive. That's how they learn how to
Hmm.
provide. They feel that they are doing the best that they can to provide for their families, for their brethren, But the thing is
Yeah.
that the worldview and the Overton window is narrowed and limited in scope. Um, it's like the Chinese philosopher Mozi said, we didn't think about more like decision making and communal living through the principle of Jian Ai, which means universal love. And what he was talking about was that Confucius had this concept of love in the sense and filial piety of like, you must revere your family, your ancestors, and your tribe essentially,
Hmm.
and that is virtue. Um, and Moltke said that, well, a true, a philosopher's son, or what they had like a, they had like different, terms for this, like for a noble person, like a philosopher's son or something like that. He said that the noble person understands that that extrapolates from love for the self, love for the family, love for your tribe, love for your neighboring tribes, love for your nation, love for your neighboring nations, love for the world, extrapolates out. And that is a more virtuous and noble way to live. And that's Mozart's, uh, in English pronunciation, Mosey or whatever. um, but he talked about universal love, Jian Ai in Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always liked that principle. Sometimes I feel like he sort of was looking over the shoulders of some Buddhist monks who were visiting from India at the time. I don't know, but because in Buddhism we have metta, which is loving kindness, and
Very, sounds very similar.
yeah, it's boundless, right? And Mozart he made it more systematic. He systematized it like a political philosopher, as it were, like Machiavelli or whoever.
Mm.
um,
Right.
but anyway, I don't want to like. I'm not trying to go on a tangent. What I'm trying to say is that the scope of our concerns should be broadened, and it should be larger than just like our local concerns, because like I'm making this series about the Federalist Papers, as you know, and our framers were very much in line with that. In fact, that was what it meant. What they meant by being a Federalist was thinking of a union of states, of saying like we are all interconnected, and that's what the United States is supposed to represent. That interconnection, the interconnectivity, and the pluralism of each state and each like subculture within the states, what they called factions, what Madison would like
Mm.
to call factions. And so all this stuff is fresh on my mind, but I don't know what's on your mind right now, Sense. So,
Well,
um,
I think that we agree that it's corporate responsibility that we're in this mess. I really I believe that the corporations, big oil in particular, are aligned with our governments. Both Obama and Biden, by the way, were record producers of oil
Yeah.
in American
And
history.
coal.
I think it was at Rutgers University, like right after Obama left office, he gave a speech where he was talking about record oil production, and he was like, "That was me, guys."
Yeah.
And then Biden just has been steady pumping it out. He's
Okay.
created the greatest oil reserve that we've ever had. He's done a lot for battling climate change. The IRA is great legislation. It's fantastic in terms of like giving people opportunities to purchase climate solutions and really provide opportunities for investment into technologies. So he's done a lot of good, but he's also been a record oil producer. So how do you balance that?
Well, yeah.
Um, so some good, some bad. But the oil companies themselves, they should be held accountable. I think that there should be lawsuits against them. There should be litigation going after them because they've known for decades and they've perpetrated a denial campaign, and they're causing billions of dollars worth of damage and costing people their lives. People die of pollution from their products. The air pollution around the world is toxic. So I think that there are people to hold accountable.
Yeah.
It's only going to get worse as emissions continue to rise. But just to wrap it up, I just would really like to extend my gratitude to all the first responders, all the people that are responding from nearby states
Yes.
to coming to help
Showing
in nearby
showing
countries.
exemplifying what is to be done in these situations. I mean, just
Canada and Mexico, putting aside
yeah,
political differences as they're
exactly.
being attacked by the incoming administration, to actually just get on the ground and do the
That
work.
that those stories like really made my day when I read that like these responders were, crossing borders to help out over there. I'm just like, that's exactly how you show people what is to be done, in those
Right.
situations.
Yeah.
And guys,
Yeah.
I have to
And
tell you,
contrast that to the incoming president who calls it a
yeah,
hoax, and
right.
his first day in office is all about drill, baby, drill. I don't
Yes,
need him in leadership. He's not helpful. He's useless. He ought to just be ignored. He's
yes.
attacking the people that are trying to help, pointing fingers, creating division. It's childish.
Yeah, you want to talk
It's
about
useless.
divisive speech. All right,
And
like we talk
it's
about the
just
precepts and
unnecessary. We
yeah,
need to, yeah, we need to unify around
yeah,
natural disasters, not point fingers and
right,
cast blame.
obfuscate the issue. The
Scapegoat, yeah,
Yeah, scapegoating and obfuscating, like confusing
and just spread
people.
lies.
Yeah, and
It's just
disinformation.
lies and BS. Yeah,
And we have authorities, authoritative takes on all of this. We've given some authoritative opinions, and there are organizations that are committed to reducing the harm that is caused by people upon people and upon creatures of the earth, upon the earth itself. Um, but like I wanted to say that I just tell everyone and just put it out there into the ether that um, while California is on fire, it's not just California. The Buddha is famous for his fire sermon, right? He basically, I mean, there's a different connotation there, but right now, if you feel like the malaise that everyone's describing out there in the milieu, which has been described, has been expressed through media, through social media, um, what you're feeling is that the whole world is on fire. Okay? And that is figurative. What we mean is that there is a polycrisis, there's a lot going on, and it has to do, it's social political, it's human caused, right? And what I want to proffer is not just that you mentioned sense about lawsuits and holding people accountable. I think where we start with that is by coalition, right? By critical mass, finding praxis, or meaning like building up a response that crosses different interests. Like lots of activists like to be in their sort of niche and just talk about like animal cruelty or talk about vivisection. I don't know, but but um, but those niche things can be further addressed and more methodically if we form coalitions. And
Yeah.
a coalition, not
Well,
coalitions.
that's what the oil company did, and they've been very successful.
Yes. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, we have to organize as peacemakers more effectively and at the same energy and level as the warmongers, right? We
Hmm.
that is the real mission statement of peace of mind is
Right.
to uh, essentially create that snowball. Um,
Right.
and whether we facilitate that or not as liaisons for a
It's an
coalition.
uphill battle when the government is continuing to subsidize their every move.
Well,
Make record profits, but
yeah.
yet are still accepting subsidies.
Well, like I'm trying to say in like my course on the Federalist Papers, our framers fully intended to have checks and balances against these like highly concentrated consolidations of power. Benjamin Franklin said it himself that popular sovereignty is the way towards having a better union, right? Like that is popular sovereignty means rule by the people for the people, right? And that, like, when we say that, that's what we're talking about. And by the people, we mean all people. We're not talking about interest groups and corporate entities and enterprises with their cores of lawyers and their legal teams and they're bought paid for legal their judges, whoever. Um, that stuff it needs to be addressed directly, head on, as a coalition. I mean,
Mhm.
and so like this whole thing, the infighting, all the discord among people who see there's a problem but they don't know how to solve the problem. It's like good luck trying to like fight. Fight an army like by yourself. Good job with that.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
only the Buddha could do that, and the reason is because he had the whole world on his side, right?
Mhm.
And that's what we need to do. We need to point to the earth and say, "This is our witness." We can see, like the earth is being affected, and we can see that. It's evident. Every measure that we come up, every way we can measure things is showing us that there's something wrong. You know,
Well, yeah, it's evident. People don't need to listen to us tell them about climate change. It's evident. You can see it on your own. It's everywhere. The floods in Brazil this year. I mean, you go down the list, one disaster after another this past year. Just the fact that every year consecutively is the hottest year on record, 10 years in a row.
yeah,
Come on. Yeah.
we're out here in the real world, as it were. There are real problems that we're dealing with, and we're all dealing with it. Whether you feel placated now, you feel complacent at this moment, eventually these things will boil over. And like I'm hearing about all kinds of issues that are affecting people that it's never affected before. And because we just keep ending up with these crises, COVID and climate change, like the storms and for example, the hurricanes didn't just affect Florida. You know, all the other parts of the southeast of the United States were being affected.
The
Uh,
mountains of North Carolina.
yeah, right.
Wrap your
So
head around that.
right. So we were all hyper focused on Florida, and then like North Carolina was devastated by record floods, mudslides, you name it. Like there's just sheer devastation. Texas being affected by bomb cyclones and winter storms. Why is that happening? Stuff that could not be explained in all of our modern history. Like it's not happened before. You know,
Nope,
so
we haven't had these concentrations of CO2 in our atmosphere for 100,000 years.
mm,
And we're seeing what now is like some people want to call the new normal. It's not the new normal. It's unprecedented. We've never seen extreme weather events like we're seeing now at the frequency and the intensity that we're seeing them.
right. So short run, what can we do? We have there. I will leave links, or we will leave links, but I will put them personally down there, to how we can give some outreach to the people in need right now in California. It also videos that outline the issue in a more holistic way, and
Hmm.
also um, for the long run, again, we need to start building coalition. We need to start um, gaining critical mass, and just uniting, organizing. The good old days, like the good old days in the civil rights movement. That's what needs to
Yep.
happen, and
Yep.
it needs to affect.
Folks, please leave a comment, share your ideas. We're open for suggestions. What can we do?
Yes, what can we do? Who do we talk to? Please leave comments, guys. Your input is all the is invaluable. It matters the most. The more people that participate, the more people that are engaged and aware of this issue, the better, right? So, guys, I know this ran a little bit longer than we intended, but if you got something out of this, please leave a comment. If you have a question, ask. Uh, if you like this video, leave a like. And since you want to,
Yes, thanks for listening, folks,
yeah,
and spending some time with us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. I want to just leave with what Catherine Hayhoe, climate scientist and author, and one of my favorite voices in the space, says, and it's real, it's us, and it's serious. So, thanks again, and God bless.
all right, everyone, you take care. If you made it this far to the end of the video, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu to you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.